There are some ancient discoveries that words can't do justice to. You'll only believe them if you can see them with your own eyes. We can't transport you to these places, but we can do the next best thing by showing you what they look like and telling you their stories. Strap yourself in for a video tour of some of the world's most incredible ancient discoveries. Who left a collection of pipes scattered around Mount Baigong in China? And how were they made? The enigmatic relics are distributed all over the ground at the foot of the mountain, some 20 miles to the south of Dalinga City. They'd be considered interesting artifacts no matter where they were, but what makes their placement here so odd is the fact that it's such an isolated area. There's no sign that there was ever a settlement in the area, nor any industrial processes that would necessitate the creation of these pipes. It's a dry, desolate area where there's no life or water, some 10,000 feet above sea level. Analysis of the pipes has confirmed that they're made up of 30% ferric oxide, with significant amounts of silicon dioxide and calcium dioxide in the mix. If we didn't know better, we'd say they were made in a factory, using advanced smelting methods. The combination of so much calcium oxide suggests an interaction between iron and sandstone over several centuries, which means the pipes must be very old. They're not a natural phenomenon, but their purpose and, indeed, their very presence are unexplained. Burial traditions have changed dramatically over the course of history and vary just as dramatically from place to place. In March 2021, a whole new type of burial arrangement was found by researchers in Poland. These megalithic tombs, uncovered in the village of Debiany, are more than 150 feet long. Aside from being notable for their size, they're also surprisingly elaborate. The longest walls of each tomb were reinforced with wooden palisades, while the eastern walls contained entrance doors taking visitors through to an atrium. Archaeologists believe that the atrium contained burial chapels. This implies that rather burying the dead and then leaving them, these tombs were designed so people could return and see their deceased loved ones as often as they wanted. There are no human remains at the site today, and experts believe that those who were laid to rest here were removed while the cemetery was still actively in use. That implies that these may have been temporary tombs where people laid to rest temporarily, before a more permanent burial elsewhere. Archaeological evidence at the site suggests the tombs were built during the 9th century, but might stand on top of a far older burial ground. We often think of megacities as being a modern invention, but that's not the case, or at least not in Ukraine anyway. Thanks to a 2019 study, we now know that the Trypillian culture, who lived in Ukraine some 6,000 years ago, built enormous settlements that contained thousands of individual buildings laid out thoughtfully with spaces for roads and thoroughfares. There might not have been any skyscrapers in them, but they would definitely have been considered megacities in comparison to the far smaller settlements around them. The most recently discovered Trypillian megacity was first found close to Nebelivka in 2012 and is still being excavated today. Aside from regular houses, archaeologists have also discovered much larger buildings that may have served as community spaces for ritual purposes, or perhaps even for the purposes of local government. While historians are still working on their theories about this place, they currently believe that it might have got too big for its own good. With so many people living here and such a centralized power structure, managing the city effectively and communicating decisions might have eventually become impossible. It appears that the settlement was abandoned about 5,670 years ago, after around 3 centuries of occupation. The modern city of Rome in Italy is built on top of ancient Rome, but that doesn't mean that the buildings created by the ancient Romans have all been lost. It just means you have to do a little digging for them. In May 2020, this beautiful mosaic floor, laid down as part of a grand villa in either the 2nd or 3rd century, was found under around 3 feet of muddy earth in the north of the city. An ancient villa was found on this site more than a century ago. But somehow the presence of this stunning floor had been overlooked until a new archaeological survey team came along for a second look. The reason the former residence is now covered over with mud and grass is that at some point in the distant past, somebody decided to build a vineyard right on top of it. While covering over such a pretty floor with mud could be looked at as an act of vandalism, in this case it did us the favor of preserving every detail of the floor, including all of its original colors. Local tourism officials hope that the floor will eventually be open for the public to come and look at, but that's likely to take time. There's still more careful digging work to do. The mighty ancient city of Tenochtitlan was the capital of the Aztec Empire until Herman Cortés and his Spanish conquistadors came along and conquered it in November 1519. The Spanish invaders destroyed many Aztec monuments and works of art, but they didn't wreck everything. Recently, this incredible golden eagle bas-relief was found at the site of Templo Mayor. The large stone carving, 4 feet long and 2 feet wide, is set into the base of Templo Mayor as part of a chapel dedicated to Huitzilopochtli. Archaeologists think it was created during the reign of Motocuzoma Ilhuicamina between 1440 and 1469. They already know that Templo Mayor was a sacred place to the Aztecs, and also a focal point for human sacrificial activity. That means the eagle probably got more than a little bloody during the time the temple was in use. While Aztec symbolism is complex and still isn't fully understood today, the eagle was closely connected with both sacrifice and war. It was even believed to be the shape-shifting spirit of the sun, and so would have acted as a protector to Aztec rulers. What does all of this mean in terms of the placement of this specific bas-relief in this specific place? The jury is still out on that. As technology advances, it's becoming easier to make archaeological discoveries without even having to disturb the ground. The use of a new kind of motorized high-resolution ground-penetrating radar technology led archaeologists to the discovery of this Viking ship burial in Norway in 2018. The ship is enormous, more than 70 feet long, and yet it's barely 2 feet below the ground. It's incredible that it had never been found until the radar technology detected it. While it's impossible to say for sure without digging the vessel up, the radar images suggest that it's so well preserved that it still has its entire keel intact. It's buried under what's now farmland in Otsfold in the southeast of the country, and was almost certainly once topped with a burial mound. The burial mound was probably flattened when the usage of the land changed, but the buried ship remained undisturbed. That's unusual. There are only 3 other ship burials known to be fully intact in the entirety of Norway. The tradition was reserved for individuals of high status, so when archaeologists do get around to digging this one out, they expect to find a warrior leader surrounded by the grave goods they were laid to rest with. There wasn't too much to choose from in terms of grave goods during the Stone Age. It seems that if you wanted to show your respect to the dead, you accessorized their graves with as many elk teeth as possible. That's the impression we get from the curious burial grounds of Yuzhny Oleni Ostrov, an island in Russia's Republic of Karelia. The occupants of these graves were laid to rest a whole 8,200 years ago. The graves are covered in red ochre, which is believed to have been either a mark of respect or an intention to comfort the deceased in the afterlife. Aside from the red ochre, almost everything is covered in elk teeth. The dead are dressed with pendants made of elk incisors, dresses with linings of elk teeth, elk tooth belts, and even elk tooth headdresses. The materials parts of the clothing have long since rotted away, but the elk teeth have survived and allow us to picture what the clothing may have looked like. Similar burial traditions from the same era have been identified across much of Scandinavia. Elk were probably hard to find among the ancient Eurasian forests, and so the more of these rare teeth the dead were buried with, the more respect was shown by the gesture. How much can a single scrap of fabric tell us about history? Well, that depends on the piece of fabric. This tiny piece of wool is around 3,000 years old and was found in Israel in early 2021. The age of the wool dates it to the time of the biblical King David, and its color suggests that it might have a connection to him. Making purple dye wasn't easy, and its use was strictly prohibited. That's why the shade is still known as royal purple today. The discovery was made in the Timna Valley, and if it isn't directly connected to King David, it might be connected to one of his household or possibly his successor, King Solomon. The color was considered valuable because it didn't fade, and also because it was incredibly hard to obtain. The dye required to make the color came from snails, with only tiny quantities inside the body of each mollusk. Because of this, a piece of royal purple fabric was likely to be worth more than gold. We'll never know for sure that this scrap of wool came from one of King David's fabulous robes, but it certainly came from someone important. What did people use as currency before coins and paper? That's an abstract question, and one that most people never give a lot of thought to. Archaeologists and historians have to consider that question, though, and they think they might know what went on in ancient Europe. According to a study published in January 2021, Europeans living 3,500 years ago used bronze rings, blades, and ribs when bartering and trading. Groups of bronze rings like this recent collection found in Czechia are all made to a standardized size, shape, and weight. If weighed by hand, which would have been the only option back then, there would be no way of telling them apart. Buried deposits of rings, axe blades, and ribs are found across Europe so often that archaeologists now believe that they're examples of people burying their wealth for safekeeping. While they would doubtless also have proved useful for their more obvious decorative or weaponized purposes, the fact that they have such similar weights means that they could have been used in standardized transactions. For example, an ancient European may have bartered for 1, 2, or 3 bronze rings worth of meat, grain, or clothing. Conventional archaeology has long said that primitive societies didn't have a commercial economy. Now it appears that conventional archaeology might be wrong. Let's leave Europe and head across to the United States of America, or more specifically, California. That's where we find the mysterious Coso petroglyphs. The little-known ancient works of art are spread across 90 square miles of desert land and have never been adequately explained in terms of purpose or origin. Part of that is down to the fact that archaeologists can't gain access to them. Most of the area they're in is protected because it belongs to a naval air weapons station. There are thousands of examples of the petroglyphs, which range from small representations of animals to much larger humanoid figures. And we use the word humanoid because they don't appear to be human. It's thought that the oldest of the Coso petroglyphs was created around 13,500 years ago. Some experts have speculated that the humanoid figures are actually shamans wearing headdresses and might tell the story of mystical Native American vision quests. That's just one interpretation, though, and it would be just as easy to say that they're drawings of gods or spiritual beings. Perhaps we'd know more if anyone was ever allowed to study them in detail. When we hear of a magnificent new archaeological discovery in Egypt, we tend to imagine that a team of experts has been digging up the sand of the desert or crawling around in the dark beneath a temple or tomb. This next discovery is a little different. It's a 3,000-year-old statue of the great pharaoh Ramses II, and it was found in one of the most socially deprived residential areas in Cairo. Unfortunately, the once mighty statue isn't in great condition. It would have been 26 feet tall when it was in one piece. It's been broken into several parts at some point in the distant past, and has then gone on to spend hundreds of years under dirty groundwater. Now it's surrounded by derelict housing. Such is the scale of the damage to the facial features and identifying marks on the statue that archaeologists initially had trouble identifying it. but they're now confident that it was made during the time of Ramses II's legendary reign. The colossal quartzite statue is now being delicately repaired and will take pride of place in the entrance of the Grand Egyptian Museum once the work is done. In February 2021, Italian plumber Luciano Fagiano was called out to what he expected to be a standard job in Puglia, Italy. He'd been told there was a broken toilet in a restaurant, and he was the right man to fix it. He could never have imagined what happened next, and nor could Italian archaeologists. Upon arriving at the scene, Luciano quickly realized he was going to have to dig out the pipes behind the toilet to get to the root of the problem. When he did, he found an unexpected trench under the toilet that seemed to run on beyond and beneath the walls of the building. Luciano followed the trench along in an increasingly stunned state as he wandered into a previously unknown network of rooms and corridors. Inside those rooms were ancient frescoes and ceramics, and murals on the walls that might even be connected to the legends of the Knights Templar. Professional archaeologists were called to the scene and identified the presence of an old Franciscan chapel. The owners of the restaurant had no idea there was anything quite so significant beneath their property, but they now intend to cash in on it by offering guided tours. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you soon!